We're looking at Babylon, and we're going to look at it all the way through to the end to Revelation. And it's also, if you took it literally, it would be the Tower of Babylon, because it's exactly the word that gets used. So that's the word on the right-hand side. It's the noun, and it's found 260 times in the Bible. Jerusalem's found over 1,000 times. But the next town or city is way below that. So between Jerusalem and Babylon, they're huge, huge themes and huge cities that are mentioned in the Bible. And it's the two times it's translated as Babel is in Genesis 10 and 11. And there's a reason for that. Is in the context, the translators were looking at more the verb, which is to confuse, although that's not the actual Hebrew word, it's the one on the right, the noun. They were looking at the context, and it was that God came down and confused. And so that on the left-hand side means confused, it's taken straight there, I've underlined it there. And I was just chatting to Caden, he's just finished a Hebrew exam, and I was asking him about this dilemma. Why didn't they choose Babylon and choose Babel? And he says it's quite common, and he just mentioned another example. He said kings, the word king is melech, and the verb is malak, and they're very similar. If you look at the letters, they almost look exactly the same, and that's just a common way it's done. So Babylon is a theme from the beginning, Genesis 2 and 3. These are slides from Scott's, you might recognize them, just to bring your attention to Nimrod and the star there. Nimrod was the guy who was this mighty hunter, it says in Genesis 10 verse 9. And he's the guy who established all these towns, including Nineveh. And another guy I just want to bring attention to is Terah and Abraham. We know them, or Abram. And it says in Joshua 24 verse 2, and Joshua said to all the people, these are the words of the Lord, the God of Israel. In the past, your fathers, Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, were living on the other side of the river, and they were worshipping other gods. And so Babel, just a whole lot of gods, just full up on gods. This specific god for Abraham was the god called Sin, or Nana. You can imagine worshipping Sin, it's quite a thing. And it's a moon god. And so these ziggurats were all over the place. In fact, the ziggurat at Ur, which is where Abraham comes from, the Ur of the Chaldeans, is one of the few ziggurats that you can actually see today. And it's quite a big one. And that's that moon god. And it's, I don't know if any of you recognize the symbol for Nana, or the Sin god, is the crescent moon. And this is all in Iraq, and obviously a lot of these symbolism links. And so we're going to look at a couple of things that link it all together, because Babylon in the end is basically this one world order where all these things come back together. So we saw the separation, God separates the nations, and Satan brings them all back to come against Christ in the end. And so there's again the slide. In the red, you've got the land of Shinar, which is basically where it all started. And there again, you see Nineveh there. There's a city, Akkad. I don't know if you can see it there in the red. That's another city that Nimrod set up. And the whole empire is an Akkadian empire. So remember, all the languages went out. So the Akkadian language went out. And the Akkadian for Babylon means gate of the gods. And so the whole time it's just really about these foreign gods, these idols, trying to reach God through this stairway to heaven. And Nebuchadnezzar came, and he was the first, well, he was the king of Babylon. And he again tried to set up the ziggurat. And he set it up on the same place. They think it's the same place as the Tower of Babel. And this one was to the god Marduk, which is the god of creation, order, and kingship. And you'll see that Satan's always attacking God's order, from the creation order, through marriage, all the way to the end. And the whole time he's coming with an anti-Christ type of false religions set up. And all these false religions come back to the Tower of Babel. So there's the language or the empire of the day. So I took this off Google last week, Google Maps. And as you can see there, just to get a context, you've got Jordan on the left. On the top is basically where that ziggurat is, the Tower of Babel. And then there's that great ziggurat of Ur, which is actually still intact. It's been built up again. That's where Abraham used to live. And so all the languages and all the gods are all over the place. But there's Kuwait, and that's basically we're in the Iraq. So I'm going to zoom in on the Tower of Babel now. So when I zoom in there, this is a modern map. This is the Euphrates River going down there. And these have all been established. I don't know if you remember the remains of the Hanging Garden. That is one of the 7 wonders of the world. And that's what Nebuchadnezzar set up. He got a wife, and his wife missed the nature and the animals. He set up this massive zoo and this massive, beautiful, cascading flowers, and just it's a real wonder of the world. And this was excavated back in 1899, they started. So it went on to 1917 by a guy called Robert Calderway, and he excavated this, and he found these things, the remains of the Hanging Gardens, the Ishtar Gate. He actually took that whole Ishtar Gate to Germany because he was a German archaeologist. And so the Ishtar, another god, and there's just hundreds of gods, and these are massive. This gate is 14 meters high. You can see it in Berlin. It's 30 meters wide. So these walls, it's amazing that all these walls, this whole area here is basically Babylon. It's a massive city. It was really, that's why it's a head of gold. I mean, this place was incredible. And the amazing thing is there's prophecy in Isaiah 14, Jeremiah 50, that talk about this place receiving the judgments, because we're going to get to the end. We'll look at the judgment now in Babylon. So we're going to this is the Babylon that's been destroyed, the current one. And there's prophecies for this one. And there's prophecies that still need to be fulfilled. So we're going to look at a few of those. But there's a wall that goes all the way around this. And there's Saddam Hussein. He built his place up there, but it's just on the outside of the wall. So he's quite close to Babylon. And he actually redid the Ishtar Gate, and he did quite a few renovations to the whole place. And but what's interesting, there's no people living there. So, I mean, when you zoom in, you just check these cities all around it, and it's just desolate. And there's an amazing guy, I recommend you go and have a look on YouTube, called Joel Kramer. He's an archaeologist, a Christian guy. He went there, and he zooms in with a drone, and he goes through this whole area, and he shows how there's just these animals and how literally the Bible's been fulfilled. There is no one for thousands of years that have been there. And it's these jackals, and he shows them the jackals, and there's these owls. I'll just read some of the prophecies. Jeremiah 50, verse 39. Therefore the desert creatures will live there along with the jackals. The ostriches will live in it, and it will never be again inhabited or dwelt in from generation to generation. As when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah with its neighbors, just keep that in mind because this gets repeated. As God did Sodom and Gomorrah, it's a quick judgment. And the judgment at the end for Babylon is quick, and it's with fire as well. And so when we look at Nebuchadnezzar and we look at the judgment that God put on this Babylon, it's much worse in the end. But also the Babylon that's to come is a far greater kingdom, and far more powerful and far more luxurious. So this is a picture of what's to come. Isaiah 13 verse 19 says, the Babylon, the beauty of kingdoms, the glory of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It will never be inhabited or lived in from generation to generation. Nor will the Arab pitch its tent here, nor will the shepherds make their flocks lie down. Their kingdoms, the glory of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. But the desert creatures will lie down there, and their houses will be full of owls. And there's one little symbol I'm going to look at. We've got to be careful not getting too distracted with the symbolism. We've got to get the big picture here. But there is a lot of symbolism in Babylon itself. And there's a lot of literal stuff. Shaggy goats will frolic there. Isaiah 13:22, hyenas will howl in their fortitude. And so this guy, Joel, he shows how there's been a fox caught, and he shows a literal thing. But having said that, there's a lot of stuff in Isaiah, Jeremiah that hasn't been fulfilled. So we can't actually say this is all a complete fulfillment, because there's a lot of stuff talking about the stars going dark and things that haven't actually happened to Babylon. So there's obviously future fulfillment. So it's a partial fulfillment of Babylon. One of the things that makes me think that Babylon isn't going to come back here is that it talks about in Revelation 18 verse 19, sorry for the great town in which was increased with wealth. Then it says, who had their ships on the sea because of her great stores. It talks about ships, and Jeremiah talks about the sea has come up over Babylon, and she has been engulfed with its tumultuous waves. So it's almost like it's a port city, and we'll get into where it might be. I'm not going to try to speculate or guess. And it may actually just be, in some sense, this powerful all-world, because it's very much a world thing that happens in the end. There's a world government, a world financial system, a world religions that all come together under that kind of name of Babylon. So there's the empires again. Just to remind you, this is Daniel 2. The first empire is that Babylonian empire. That's with Nebuchadnezzar. Then the Medes and the Persians came in, crept in under the city, and they took it in a night. Again, there's quick. In the end, God takes it in an hour. 1 hour, Babylon is taken down. But what's quite interesting, and one's got to be careful of just reading into things, but in 1 Peter 5, verse 13, it says, she who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you greetings, and so does my son Mark. And so Peter calls Rome a Babylon. Now, we're not sure if he's just trying to use it symbolically, because it did have a symbolic meaning in the sense that it was it symbolized a nation that was proud, that had turned away from God, that was involved in idolatry and all that which was going on with Rome. And the persecution in Rome is very much what the persecution is going to look like at the end. There's going to be a massive persecution against believers in the end. I'm just going to read the end of Daniel, which is this last. So you've got the Roman Empire, and then later on you've got the Holy Roman Empire, which basically governs a lot of Europe. So it's difficult to see exactly, and we don't want to get things wrong, but it says here in Daniel 2:40, then there will be a fourth kingdom, as strong as iron, and as much iron as crushes and shatters all things, so that like iron that breaks to pieces, it crushes and breaks into all these pieces. And that you saw the feet and the toes, and there's these 10 kings that come out of the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom. So we know it's not like, Babylon, this single world power, a divided kingdom. It goes on to say in 42, as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, as some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And so we've got this Roman Empire. The first part covers 27 BC to about 476 AD. And that would be most of the Mediterranean area that surrounded the Mediterranean Sea. So Italy, Spain, France, Greece, Egypt, Turkey. And then as you go into the Holy Roman Empire, much later on, AD 800, now we go into the rest of Europe, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, northern Italy, parts of France. And so the European Union becomes now, in one sense, the new kind of Roman Empire. Just another picture, just with the dates, and just explaining that image that we know so well. All right, so the destruction came quickly. Daniel chapter 5, Belshazzar, they're having a big party, and they've taken the wine goblets from Jerusalem out of the temple, and they're starting to have a big party there. And all of a sudden, Belshazzar was now Nebuchadnezzar's son. It says in verse 4, they drank the wine and praised the gods of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, wood, and stone. And so that's very much what's happening and what will happen in the Babylon to come. There's this massive amount of money. There's a massive influx of just focus on just really the lust of the flesh and the pride of life. And it all becomes about this gold. And so as God writes in the world, Mina, Mine, Tekel, Parson, be found in the scales wanting. And then that night, the Medes and the Persians took them out. And so we see these patterns, and we can learn a lot from Daniel. Because Daniel, he's in this Babylonian empire. And we too are going into a Babylonian empire to a degree that will be under more and more control. It's going to be more and more anti-God. It's going to be more and more controlled by the prince of the air, Satan. And we're going to be more and more persecuted. And so we look at Daniel. How did he cope in this anti-God, in this total pagan society? And you'll see the same things that they did to Daniel, they're going to try to do to us. The first thing is through education. They try and come into the education system, and they bring the lies, and they undo all the order that we've been learning, the order of God. They undo what marriage stands for, what gender. Everything is just under attack. God's order is under attack. And so Daniel gets in the very chapter 1, verse 4, it says, and he ordered him to teach them the literature of the language of the Chaldeans. So straight away, he gets into Babylon, and they're just starting to pound him. And so we're also going to get pounded from all sorts of education systems telling us, you got to compromise, you got to learn this is the way of the world. And they start to redefine God's laws, and everything gets under attack. Evolution and marriages, everything. And it becomes about a worship also of self. And so this whole gold and this aspect of, we've got to be part of this system. And so everything is putting man first. And so even when you look at, Scott mentioned last time, the critical race theory, feminism, LGBT, all these movements are very much what for me, it's about me. Even abortion, it's not about the child who's going to die, it's all about me. So the love and the worship starts becoming on self with all these different agendas. And then they try and, after the education, they change their names. And they try to change who you stand for. We stand for Jesus, and this is what we believe. But even their very names get changed. Verse 7, it says, then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them, and Daniel, he assigned the name Belshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and Azariah, Abednego. And so they got these new pagan god names. Remember, this is where all the religions of the world are coming from. And so they start giving these names to trying to change the identity. But obviously on the outside, they can't change the inward identity of who we are in Christ. And ultimately, it comes down to worshipping the system and worshipping the Antichrist. And that's where it's all going. And so even with Nebuchadnezzar, he tries to get these men to bow their knee and worship this golden image when all the music starts, and they refuse. They said, no, we're not going to. And this is, it says Daniel made up his mind even before. He was going to serve God. He wasn't going to partake of the king's food. He was going to pray 3 times a day towards Jerusalem. And he wasn't going to bow his knee to the system. And so there's a lot of these principles we can take even for today. We mustn't be part. Because the one thing that gets from Jeremiah to Isaiah, and we'll repeat it as I go through it to the end, it keeps saying, come out. Come out of her. And so we learn these principles, what Daniel, he was in the world, but he was in no means of the world. And so in the final Babylon, we see the same thing. So chapter 7 of Revelation 18 more or less looks on the woman riding the beast of a religious order, so a one world religion, probably under the Roman Catholic Church, which will then be destroyed, and then we worship the Antichrist. Chapter 18 is more of this gold and silver that we see. And it says in verse 12 of chapter 18, cargoes of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen. And here's purple and scarlet, and we know what that stands for. Very much the Roman Catholic Church, and every kind of citron wood, every kind of article. So again, that's where their focus is, that's where their worship is. In chapter 18, verse 3, for all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, full up with immorality. And the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich with the wealth of sensuality. And it's just about the sensual, worldly wealth and lust. But there will be a judgment. And just as this Babylon here was judged, there's a judgment to come right in the end. And the judgment was prophesied in Isaiah 13, verse 17. It says, for this first Babylon, I am going to stir up the Medes against them, who will not value the silver or take pleasure in gold. Again, that's where their eyes are, on the silver and gold. And their bowels will mow down the young men. They will not even have compassion on the fruit of the woman, nor will their eye pity the children. And Babylon and the beauty of the kingdoms, the glory of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as God when he overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. And so there's the judgment, and the judgment comes, and the judgment will come on Babylon in the end. And I'll just put that up there. There's a saying that comes from this. Can you see the writing on the wall? And so the question really tonight is, can we see the writing on the wall? Can we see what's happening around us? Or have we got our head in the sand? Can we see that these new world order systems are coming together, and it is coming to a final Babylon? And are we prepared? Are we going to be part of her, or are we going to come out of her? And so when we actually see the physical hand, it's actually too late. So we've got to see what does God say in Scripture so that we're ready for the times, and then we're not taken off guard. And so in summary, these lessons from Daniel, we need to understand the writing on the wall. We need to understand the Scriptures. We need to understand, what is God saying? What are these prophecies? What has come true? What is still to come true? And then we need to not get seduced. There's a lot of glamour, a lot of gold, a lot of glitter, and there's a lot of benefit for joining the system. But you're going to lose something when you come out. It's not going to be easy to come out, but we need to be very separate from this system. And then don't compromise. One thing I learned from Daniel is don't compromise. He could have easily, when he was called to bow before, he could have just said, look, guys, let's just bow and just keep the king happy, because what good are we going to be dead here? We don't believe in this golden image, man, but let's just bow down. But he didn't. He didn't compromise. And he got thrown into they all got thrown into the fire. He didn't compromise with what he ate. He didn't compromise with his prayer life. There's laws coming out now where you get caught in the UK or Canada for praying, they can lock you up. And so we're going to have quite harsh laws coming, and we need to, as Daniel says in the beginning, he considered and he prepared his heart for this, that he was going to set his eyes on Jerusalem, and he wasn't going to compromise. And we almost got to, as we read this morning, take our thoughts captive and say, what are we going to do in these situations? Are we just going to go along with it and compromise, or are we going to come out of it? Verse 3 of chapter 18, for all the nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her immorality. Everyone drinks it. And the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants have become rich. And it will be tempting, because we could become rich if we join the system. But we've got to come out. There's two principles that I instill when I go hiking with the boys in the mountains. And it's not just to see the beautiful nature and God's hand in creation, which is wonderful, but it's actually a principle of learning to persevere. Put on a thing. It's often especially when they're younger, Dad, when are we going to get there? No, it's a long way. We've got to get through this. And Daniel's in this world. It's very uncomfortable in Babylon. It's amongst pagan gods. And we need to learn to persevere. And then when we get to the cave, when we finally get there, it's actually so nice not to have technology and not be latched onto the system, because now we learn that we actually don't need it. There's water up there. We've got a thing over our head. Yes, we're going to sleep on the stone, but we've got everything we need. But the gold of the world is always pulling us back, and we think, we have to have this, we have to have this, we have to have this. And so we need to learn that all we need is Jesus and the Word of God. All right, so let's just quickly look at and summarize some of Babylon's disobedience. And what we're looking at is attributes from the original that actually come all the way through to the end, to Nebuchadnezzar's time and to the very final end of Babylon. Pride being right there, and Scott mentioned that last week, make your name great, go up to heaven. Who do we think we are? We could never reach God. I mean, God's far higher than this cigarette, which was 91 meters, which is very high. But God's, to think that we can bring God down and somehow get into heaven like that, it's crazy. And that's just pride. And the pride, we've got to be careful of pride. That's exactly what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Listen to these words of Nebuchadnezzar. The king reflected, and he's probably looking at this beautiful kingdom and the gardens and the zoo on top for his wife and everything. And he says, is this not the Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty? You see where the self and the worship comes in, and the pride. And as we know what happened, God cast him down. He had the mind of an animal, and he ate grass for 7 years. And so there's always a judgment, but be careful of pride. The other thing is there's always a rejecting of God's law. I just brought that up from last week, a key verse, because they knew God had said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. It was in Genesis 1:28. It was again repeated in Genesis 8:17. Because it says there at the end, I've highlighted it there, verse 4, otherwise we will be scattered abroad over the face of the earth. God wanted them to be scattered. But they disobeying God, there wasn't many commands back then. Go be fruitful, fill the earth, look after the animals. But the very one command. Later we see, obviously, don't have foreign gods and the rest of the commands. But, it was very simple, and they disobeyed. Idolatry, massive. Rejecting God's law. Third one, idolatry. All these gods, like I say, come from the Tower of Babel. And then there's the satanic unity. I'll just put it like that. There's this false unity where everything is going to come under one umbrella. One world religion, one world government, one world monetary system. It's all going to be coming together. And we've seen it through stages. And I'm going to look at some videos just now of just in my profession of how I've just seen this happen, this drive towards this unity. Revelation 17:18, and the woman whom you saw is the great town which is ruling over the kings of the earth. So the woman in scarlet riding the beast is the great town, of Babylon, and she is ruling over the whole earth. And so it's not just a local a town ruling a local area. It's a global. There's always a false gospel. We can reach heaven on our own. We can do it in our own strength. Even as Anson preached this morning about grace, you get false grace. You get this hyper grace. So we can sin more so grace may abound. There's false church, everything. So from the religious to the governments, all these false orders come out of this Babylonian system. This is one aspect of the symbolism that came to my attention back in 2000 when I started to look at some of these secret organizations, because Satan works in the secret. We've learned about Satan. He's deceptive. This is actually an owl in the background. This is called the Cremation of Care. This is found in Bohemian Grove, and there's all these secret organizations, Skull and Bones and Bilderberg Group, and there's all these groups, and these big guys come together, these oligarchs, and they meet and they try, and they don't understand that there's actually demons behind them, forcing them into these agendas, these global agendas. But they're making decisions and all that, but behind it there's actually a lot of occultic stuff happening. And I'd advise that you don't go into the symbolism of Satan. There's so much. I'm just going to bring up the dollar bill here. There's an owl in that. And then obviously there's an all-seeing eye thing there. And there's a lot of symbolism. And we just got to know, what does Scripture say? And we got to know the end goal and what to look out for and what to avoid. But the owl, the reason I brought up the owl is because as I was reading Isaiah, and the judgment on the first Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, the owl was there. And it says unclean birds. And then again in Revelation, the owl, it talks about unclean birds. And so the owl, obviously secretive, works at night like Satan. He's a silent killer. You can't see him. But he's also wise. And it's interesting, the Ishtar Gate is a female god, also of God, love, and fertility. But one of her things is wisdom. And so the Roman god Minerva came from Ishtar, when we saw that gate, the Ishtar Gate, one of the 8 gates in Babylon. is the God of wisdom. And that's one of the things, is that Satan's always pretending. He's trying to draw you in and say, I've got this secret knowledge, this secret wisdom. And so we've got to be careful of that. And so at the end of the day, all of these things, and I could spend like 5 hours going through symbolism and different cults and different things, but we're actually wasting our time. But at the end of the day, what we need to take home is that they are demonic things with a demonic agenda, trying to bring around these world systems. In Revelation 18 verse 2 it says, and he carried out with a mighty voice saying, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. And that's how I kind of got to the owl. But there's so much different stuff. But the point is, it's all demonic. And these demons, even it talks about, we looked at that Euphrates River drying up and there's 3 frogs and the demons come out. At the end, there's going to be so much demonic activity. And we see this from the beginning. Deuteronomy talks about it. In the Psalms, let me read some of these. Deuteronomy 32:17. They sacrificed to demons who are not God, to gods whom they have not known, new gods who came lately, whom your fathers did not dread. Verse 18, you neglected the rock, which I see as Christ, who begot you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. And they end up worshipping these other gods, but they're actually sacrificing to the demons behind the gods. Psalm 106, verse 35. And they mingled with the nations, brought into the system, learnt the practices. There's learning. The nations, Babylon's trying to teach you these things. They learnt the practices and served their idols, which became a snare to them. They even sacrificed their sons and their daughters to demons. And so what they do at this specific one in Bohemian Grove is they make mock sacrifices underneath. That's a 40-foot concrete owl. And they do these mock sacrifices. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of these secret things happening around the world. And it's all with a lot of demonic things. And there's these agendas that Satan's trying to bring this world order together. In Revelation 9 verse 20, the rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands, so as not to worship demons, the idols of gold and silver. And again, there's those idols, gold and silver. What's behind them? Demons. All right, so we got the Babylon on the left, Tower of Babel. We've got a new world order, a new system that Satan's setting up, the Babylon of the world to come with that one world currency, like we discussed, and that's obviously falling under all the banks coming together. Ultimately, we're going to be forced into a system, a cashless society, where we can't buy or sell unless we receive the mark of the beast. And that's a system, we've got to know the end goal. And so this is what's happening. Somehow they're going to do it, whether it's through crypto, we don't know exactly, but they're going to bring out a world system. Already with COVID, we saw the world coming together. And so the world needs to come together and make a one monetary system where everything is centralized. The power is centralized, the money is centralized, and the religion is all centralized. And so they use whatever they can. So the WHO will bring out pestilences to bring us together, and global warming, and all sorts of different things will come so that this agenda will take place. We don't have to fight it. God's allowing it. It's going to happen. We just need to be aware. So you'll see there, it's trying to bring all these codes back together. So these are talking about these OpenAI, ChatGPT. So this is this artificial intelligence. But the problem is there's so many different codes. So if we can bring all these languages together, we can be far more powerful. So can you imagine putting all these language codes, ChatGPT, all Google models, there's Palm, Gemini, Facebook has Meta. You incorporate the whole lot. It's almost like we can be like God, because now we've got all this power. And so that's what's happening. And so if we understand that, look, there's a demonic thing happening. We're far along the line now, if we go back 20 years, and we're so close to these things just being incorporated, where there's going to be a massive persecution if you don't accept these things. At the moment, we have a wonderful freedom, but the time is coming when they're going to start to implement these kind of things. We've got to understand this whole thing is going to come down like a pack of cards in the end. So we can't be part of it. Yes, technology is not bad. Your cell phone is not bad. But what's behind it and what's driving it. And so what we can start saying is, how dependent are we on these systems? How much are we loving them? Like when you lose your cell phone, like how do you feel? Is it really that bad, or do you suddenly feel lost? Because it's a guide to know where you are with your love for the world and the love for the systems that the Antichrist is setting up. But you must understand that in the end, we've got to come out and we've got to be separate. The whole thing is going to come down in 1 hour. It's going to be destroyed by fire. Just a couple of references to that. Jeremiah 51 verse 7. Babylon has a golden cup in the hand of the Lord, intoxicating all the earth. The nations have drunk of her wine. Therefore the nations are going mad. They're going crazy. Babylon will become, this is Jeremiah 51:30, has become a heap of ruins, a haunt of jackals. Now that's the first Babylon, but there's now, jumping to Revelation, verse 14, and another angel, a second one followed, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, who has made all the nations drink of the wine of the passion of her immorality. There's almost like a forcing. She's made these nations to drink of this system. Verse 18, and were carrying out as they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What a city is like this great city. And they threw dust on their heads, and they were crying out and weeping and mourning and saying, Woe, woe, the great city in which all the ships and the sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she has been laid to waste. Verse 20, Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for her against you. And so, what is our response? Our first response is actually to celebrate. We rejoice. We rejoice over her, O heaven and saints. So when we see that destruction, and if I can localize it a bit more, when you get rid of that part of Babylon, let's say it's your cell phone with pornography, rejoice. If we can't rejoice in the judgment of God, then maybe the love of Babylon is far too great, because they are wailing, because they've put everything into this system. They're relying totally on the system. So when that system crashes, they are wailing. But if we are focused on Christ and His kingdom, we shouldn't be worried about it. So we're not going to worry about these systems. The second thing is, don't depend on her. Yes, we're in the world. Yes, the cell phone is not evil in itself, but it can be used for evil. But when we're aware of what's happening behind the scenes, we're going to start taking our thoughts a bit more captive. And there will be a cost. When you make a stand like Daniel, there's going to be a cost. When you give up a part of Babylon, there's going to be a cost. And don't fight against her. This is not our battle. We don't have to fight against the system. The system's going to come. The one world government will come. The one world religion will come. We don't have to worry about it. We need to not lose focus on what we as the church is, with the Great Commission, to be a light to the world, to save people's souls of men and women from the coming judgment that is to come. And so we don't fight against her. Just want to read Revelation 17, verse 17. For God has put in the hearts to execute His purpose by having a common purpose. So God put it in their hearts. And by giving the kingdom to the beast. And so He allows, and He puts it in the heart. So all this is actually orchestrated by God, until the words of God will be fulfilled. And so all we got to do is rest in God's sovereignty. God's got it. We don't have to stress. Yes, it will get difficult, but He will give us the resources at the right time. And so very important, this aspect of fleeing is repeated through Isaiah, Jeremiah, to the end. And so there is an aspect, we're in the world, but let's not compromise. Let's flee, and let's make sure we're not caught up in that idolatry, in that all the filth and the demonic stuff that's actually happening behind the scenes. Isaiah 48:20, go out from Babylon, flee from Chaldea. Jeremiah 50 verse 8, flee from the midst of Babylon and go out of the land of the Chaldeans. Revelation 18:40, come out of her, my people. And so remember who you are in Christ. Remember your identity. Remember what you've been called to. Remember the pattern of the church. Remember where your focus should lie. Don't get distracted by the Babylon, and put your trust in Him. Daniel purposed in his heart, Daniel 1 verse 8, but Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food. We got a purpose. This morning we learned about taking those thoughts captive. We purpose in our heart where we're going to stand. Today, who are we going to serve? Are we going to bow our knee to Caesar? Are we going to compromise and become part of the system? Or are we going to be that light and stand out and be different and separate from the world? And so that's it.